The stars in the Cathara expanse were old and tired. They burned dimmer than most stars in the galaxy, and the space around them was quiet. The kind of quiet that made even experienced soldiers nervous. It was the kind of place where nothing was supposed to happen. No trade routes passed through it. No colonies existed near it. No great empires had ever bothered to claim it, because there was nothing worth claiming. That was exactly why Ambassador Velsorn of the Tharaki liked using it as a patrol corridor. His ship, the Eternal Thought, was a long and beautiful vessel. It was built with smooth, curved edges that cut through space like a blade through water. Every surface was polished. Every system was precise. The Tharaki had been building starships for over 4,000 years, and it showed in every single bolt and panel of the Eternal Thought. Tamar, it was the kind of ship that made other species feel small and a little embarrassed about their own technology. Velsorn stood at the center of the bridge. He was tall, even by Tharaki standards, with pale blue skin and 4 narrow eyes that moved independently of each other. He was watching 2 of those eyes looking at the long stretch of nothing outside the main viewing screen, and he was bored. Patrol duty at the edge of the Cathara expanse was never interesting. It had never been interesting in the past 12 rotations, and he had no reason to believe today would be any different. Then his science officer, Mirath, made a small sound. It was not a big sound. It was the kind of sound a person makes when they see something that does not match what they were expecting, and their brain is trying to catch up. A soft, short noise, like a word that got stopped before it could leave the mouth. Velsorn turned one of his eyes toward her. "What is it?" Mirath did not answer right away. She was leaning close to her console, her fingers moving quickly over the sensor controls, running the same scan again. Her other 2 eyes stayed fixed on the screen. "I am getting a reading," she said slowly, "but it does not make sense." "Sensors malfunction?" "No. I have run the check 3 times." She straightened up and turned to face him. All 4 of her eyes were pointing at him now, which meant she was serious. "Where there is a vessel." Velsorn looked out at the viewing screen. There was nothing there, just stars. "Where?" "Bearing 47 by 12, approximately 9,000 kilometers." She paused. "It is very large." Velsorn moved to her console and looked at the data himself. He was quiet for a long time. On the screen, the sensor readout was showing him numbers and shapes that he kept expecting to change, because surely they were wrong. The vessel was 3.8 kilometers long. Well, that alone was not shocking. The Tharaki had built vessels that size. The Solveth Empire had vessels even bigger. Size alone was not the problem. The problem was everything else. "There is no quantum field around it," Velsorn said. "Correct." "No dark matter compression signature." "Correct." "No anti-gravity stabilizers? No phase shielding? No energy lattice of any kind?" He looked up at her. How is it holding its own structure together at that size without any of those systems?" Mirath looked at the screen and said the words very carefully, like she was not fully sure she believed them herself. "According to the scan, the hull appears to be made of layers of metal. Thick layers. Very thick. And there are internal support beams running through the entire frame at regular intervals." She brought up a structural diagram on a secondary screen. It showed a cross-section of the mystery vessel's hull. The layers were almost comically deep. The outermost layer alone is approximately 40 meters of ferrous alloy composite. Velsorn stared at the cross-section. "That is not engineering. That is just piling metal on top of more metal." "Yes, and beneath those layers there appear to be pipes, many pipes, carrying pressurized gas and liquid through the entire body of the ship." She hesitated. "The liquid appears to be water." The bridge went quiet. Several other crew members had stopped working and were now listening to this conversation with the focused attention of people who could not believe what they were hearing. "Water," Velsorn repeated. "Yes, sir." He straightened up and folded his hands behind his back, which was what he did when he was trying to stay calm while his mind was working quickly. "What is its drive signature?" Mirath almost looked apologetic. "That is also unusual. I am reading multiple drive types operating simultaneously. There is a large fusion torch drive at the rear, but there are also ion drives, chemical booster stages, and something generating enormous thermal output in the core, possibly a reactor of the fission type. Fission! Velsorn said the word like it tasted strange. Fission reactors were something the Tharaki had used roughly 3,000 years ago, before they had discovered better methods. And the idea of a species still using fission as a primary power source on a military vessel of this size was difficult to process. Is it armed? Mirath pulled up the weapons analysis and looked at it in silence for a moment. Then she read it out loud, slowly. There are what appear to be large electromagnetic rail acceleration weapons along the dorsal and ventral surfaces. 24 of them, based on the magnetic field signatures. They are enormous. She highlighted them on the diagram. In each one was nearly a third of a kilometer long. There are also sealed bays along the sides of the vessel, likely missile storage, and a very large number of smaller point defense weapons covering almost every angle of the hull. Velsorn looked at the diagram. The vessel, if it could be called that, looked like someone had taken all the weapons they could find and bolted them onto a very large piece of metal and told it to go somewhere. There was no elegance to it, no flow, no design philosophy that he could recognize or respect. It was blunt and heavy and completely without grace. Is it moving? He asked. Yes, slowly. It is accelerating toward us. Thermal exhaust from the rear drive is significant. I am also detecting what appears to be gas venting from several points along the hull, possibly from internal pressure systems. It is leaking? That is one interpretation. Velsorn stood very still for a few seconds. Then he made a decision. Run the scan again. A full spectrum. I want to be absolutely certain of what we are seeing. The scan ran. The results came back. They were identical to the first two scans. The vessel was real. It was 3.8 kilometers of layered metal and pipes and enormous guns, and it was slowly moving through the Kethra expanse like something that had never been told it was not supposed to be there. Then the communication system on the bridge made a sound, a hailing signal, simple, clear, and using a standard conclave frequency. Someone on that vessel knew how to reach them. Velsorn looked at his communications officer, who looked back at him with an expression of pure confusion. Velsorn gave a small nod. The channel opened. The voice that came through was human. It was relaxed. It was almost cheerful. It belonged to a woman, and she spoke in Galactic Common with an accent that Velsorn did not immediately recognize. Hello out there. This is Captain Mara Osei, commanding officer of the UES Unyielding Principle, operating under the banner of the United Earth Sovereignty. We're on a standard patrol and we picked up your vessel on our own sensors about 20 minutes ago. A brief pause. Look, I'll be direct with you. We're not looking for trouble. We're actually looking for a navigational beacon. Ours got knocked loose during our last engagement, and we've been running on internal charts for about 6 days. If anyone out there has a spare, or can at least give us a positional ping, we would very much appreciate it. Captain Osei out. The channel closed. The bridge of the eternal thought was absolutely silent. Velsorn slowly turned to look at Mirath. She was staring at the communications panel with an expression that he had never seen on her face before. He was fairly certain it was on his face too, because he could feel it. A strange mixture of confusion, disbelief, and something close to awe that he did not yet want to admit to. The vessel that should not have been able to move was moving. The vessel that should not have been able to hold itself together was holding itself together. It had survived an engagement of some kind. It had said so. It had sensors capable of detecting the eternal thought, which was built to be nearly invisible to conventional scanning. And it had hailed them on an open conclave frequency, casually to ask for a navigation beacon. Sir, said Mirath quietly, what do we do? Velsorn looked at the viewing screen. The unyielding principle was visible now, a dark, massive shape against the stars, moving with the slow, heavy certainty of something that had decided to go somewhere and was not particularly interested in what stood in its way. Venting gas curled away from its hull in thin silver streams. The thermal bloom from its engines made it look almost like it was breathing. It was, without question, the ugliest ship he had ever seen. It was also, what he was beginning to suspect, one of the most dangerous. Get me a secure channel to Conclave High Command, he said. His voice was steady. He was a professional. Priority 1. I need to speak with the Admiral directly. He paused, watching the unyielding principle grow slightly larger on the screen as it crept closer through the dark. "And someone send those humans a positional ping," they asked nicely. Meredith looked at him for a moment, then nodded and began working her console. And around the bridge, other crew members exchanged glances. Quiet looks that carried the same unspoken message. Something had changed today. They did not yet know exactly what, but the feeling was there, clear and undeniable, like a vibration in the floor that comes just before something very large arrives. The report that Velsorn sent to Conclave High Command was 17 pages long. It contained full sensor data, structural analysis, weapons assessment, and communications transcripts. One at the very end, in a section he labeled Personal Observation, he wrote 4 sentences that his superiors would later quote in meetings for years. "I have patrolled the Cathara expanse for 9 rotations. I have encountered vessels from 22 known species. I have never seen anything like this ship. I do not believe our current models of physics fully explain how it exists." He sent the report and then stood at the viewing screen for a long time, in watching the unyielding principle move through the stars. It was leaving a trail of heat and exhaust behind it. Its hull, under enhanced visual sensors, was scarred and patched in dozens of places, marks from weapons fire, from impacts, from damage that had been repaired by hand, and was visible because no one had bothered to make the repairs look clean. They had just made them hold. That, he thought, said something important. He was not yet sure what, but he intended to find out. While on the other side of that 9,000-kilometer gap, on the bridge of the unyielding principle, Captain Mara Ose accepted the positional ping from the Tharaki vessel, marked it in her charts, leaned back in her command chair, and told her navigator to set a new course. She did not think much about the alien ship watching her. There would be time for diplomacy and conversation later. Right now, she had a patrol to finish, a crew to feed, and a list of repair jobs that was currently 43 items long and growing. She picked up her coffee, found it was cold, drank it anyway, and got back to work. The stars of the Cathara expanse burned quietly around both ships, and somewhere in the space between them, something had begun. Something none of them could name yet, but all of them could feel. The galaxy had just had its first good look at the unyielding principle. It had not yet decided what to make of what it saw. And that was about to change. The report from Ambassador Velsorn arrived at Conclave High Command at the 3rd hour of the morning cycle, when most of the staff were either asleep or sitting quietly at their stations doing routine work. The duty officer who received it read the first 3 pages, stopped, read them again, and then walked directly to the Admiral's private quarters and knocked on the door. This was not something duty officers did lightly. Waking an admiral in the 3rd hour was the kind of decision that ended careers if the reason turned out to be unimportant. The duty officer knocked anyway. Admiral Sen Ra, a Solveth of advanced age and considerable reputation, opened the door in her sleeping robe with the expression of someone ready to say something sharp and permanent. She looked at the duty officer's face, and the sharp words did not come. Instead, she took the data pad from the officer's hand, read the first page, went and said simply, "Get everyone in." By the 4th hour, the main conference chamber of Conclave High Command was full. They had assembled quickly. Admirals, ship architects, weapons theorists, physicists, and diplomatic advisors from 11 of the 17 species that made up the Galactic Conclave. Some of them were still straightening their uniforms. Some had clearly not slept. All of them were looking at the same sensor data from the Eternal Thought, and all of them were making variations of the same face. The face of a person who understands numbers very well and is staring at numbers that should not be possible. Admiral Sen Ra stood at the head of the long table. She had read the full report 3 times on the way to the chamber, and she was still not comfortable with it. She was not a person who liked being uncomfortable. She had built her entire career on being the one who understood things when others were confused. "So now, let us go through this systematically," she said. Her voice was calm. She was good at making her voice calm even when her mind was moving fast. "Structural analysis first. Architect Deveni, your assessment." Architect Deveni of the Vreth, who had designed 6 of the Conclave's most advanced warships and was widely considered the finest living expert on starship construction, stood up. He was a small creature with wide black eyes and 6 delicate fingers on each hand. And he looked like he had not slept and did not expect to sleep anytime soon. The hull design is... He paused. I want to choose my words carefully. It is not sophisticated. It uses no resonance layering, no quantum bonded alloys, no phase distribution plating. What it uses is simple physical thickness. He brought up the cross-section diagram on the main display screen. The image drew several quiet sounds from around the table. The alien equivalent of sharp intakes of breath. Here's the outermost hull layer is approximately 40 meters of standard ferrous composite alloy. Below that, alternating layers of ceramic heat-resistant material and what the scan identifies as reinforced concrete. Silence. Concrete, said Vice Admiral Theron of the Dravani, a large gray-skinned species known for their direct manner. As in hardened mineral aggregate, the substance primitives used to make ground-level structures. Yes, on a starship. Yes, a starship of 3.8 kilometers in length. Yes, Devaney looked around the table. I understand the reaction. I had the same one. But consider what this achieves. A vessel with that depth of physical layering, even using entirely basic materials, is extraordinarily difficult to destroy by conventional energy weapons. Plasma lances, particle beams, even phase disruptors. All of these weapons are designed with the assumption that a target vessel has a certain depth of hull, because no rational designer wastes mass on unnecessary thickness when better materials exist. But if you simply ignore the concept of efficiency and put 40 meters of metal in the way, you create a problem for those weapons that they were not designed to solve. Devaney sat down. The room stayed quiet for a moment. The internal structure, Senra said. Ask the pipes. A different analyst stood, a Tharaki physicist named Oral, who studied propulsion systems. The vessel runs an internal network of pressurized water and steam pipes throughout its entire frame. At first, this appears to be purely primitive thermal management, and it is in part, but the network also functions as a kind of hydraulic structural support system. The pressurized liquid running through the pipes helps distribute physical stress across the entire hull in a way that supplements the support beams. She brought up her own diagram. It is not elegant, it is not efficient, but it works. Under stress testing simulations, this vessel's hull should be able to absorb impacts that would crack quantum-bonded alloy plating of equivalent mass. Was simply because the physical material distribution is so deep and so redundant. How does it move? Asked another voice from the table. Oral nodded, already expecting the question. This is where it becomes genuinely interesting. The vessel uses no single drive system. It uses several running at the same time. A large fusion torch is the primary drive. Old technology, but reliable and enormously powerful at scale. Supporting it are ion drives, chemical boosters, and what appears to be a gravity-assist maneuvering system using the ship's own mass distribution. She looked at her notes. No single component of its drive system is impressive. Together they produce thrust that is significant, not fast, not graceful, but consistent and very, very difficult to simply stop. Admiral Senra nodded slowly. Weapons. The room seemed to lean in slightly. A conclave weapons analyst named Pret brought up the weapons assessment. The primary weapons are electromagnetic rail acceleration cannons. 24 of them. They work by accelerating a metal projectile, a solid metal projectile, no energy component, to a very high velocity using a magnetic rail system, and then releasing it at the target. Pret looked uncomfortable. The projectile itself is simple metal, dense, heavy, very fast. Theron of the Dravani leaned forward. And the problem with that is? Our shield, said Pret. All standard conclave vessel shielding is designed around energy weapon deflection, phase barriers, plasma dispersal fields, resonance dampeners. They are all built to handle beams and energy bursts and particle streams. A solid metal object moving at high velocity is a fundamentally different physical problem. Our shields slow it, yes, but they do not stop it the way they would stop a plasma lance. He pulled up a simulation on the main screen, a standard conclave frigate with full shields, a rail cannon projectile. The result was not comfortable to look at. The mass and velocity of these projectiles, combined with the inadequacy of our standard shielding against kinetic impact, means the unyielding principle carries weapons that are, against our specific defense systems, disproportionately effective. The room was quiet again, a longer quiet this time. Then Drenuk spoke. He was old, very old even by Solvet standards, and the Solvet lived a long time. He had been studying military history and weapons theory for longer than most of the species at the table had possessed space travel. He was sitting at the far end of the table, and he had not spoken until now, and when he did, everyone listened. "I want to draw the room's attention to a recovered battle record," he said. His voice was slow and dry, like paper. 3 weeks ago, the Dravani Corridor, a sovereignty raiding group, engaged an unidentified vessel. Based on the size and profile logged in that record, I believe that vessel was the Unyielding Principle. He brought the battle record up on the main screen. The footage was from a sovereignty sensor drone and showed a long, dark, familiar shape in the center of the frame, surrounded by the bright streaks of weapons fire. The vessel takes 14 direct hits from Sovereignty Mark 7 plasma lances in the course of this engagement, Drenuk said. "Watch carefully." They watched. When the plasma lances hit the Unyielding Principle one after another in a sequence that should have, by any standard model of Starship durability, disabled or destroyed it. Instead, each hit carved into the outer hull layers, burned away metal, and left scorched craters. But the ship kept moving, kept firing. After the 14th hit, one of its rail cannon turrets that had been knocked offline physically rotated back into position. Someone had repaired it during the battle and fired. "Hey, now watch this part," said Drenuk. On the screen, a Sovereignty cruiser moved to flank the Unyielding Principle. The human ship, instead of trying to maneuver away, turned toward it. Then it accelerated directly into the cruiser's path and hit it. It rammed it. The sound that came from around the table was a collective noise that had no good translation. A sound made by people who cannot believe what they are seeing, but are definitely seeing it. The Unyielding Principle took damage from the collision. The Sovereignty cruiser took significantly more. The cruiser broke apart. The Unyielding Principle continued. Drenuk let the silence sit for a moment. Then he said the thing he had been building towards since he first read Velsorn's report. "We have spent thousands of years optimizing our ships. We remove anything unnecessary. We build for maximum efficiency. We treat mass as a problem to be solved and redundancy as waste. We are very good at this." He looked around the table slowly. "What we built in doing all of this are ships that work perfectly in the conditions we designed them for, and ships that break, sometimes badly, when reality does not cooperate." He gestured at the frozen image of the Unyielding Principle on the screen. These humans did not have the resources or the technology to optimize, so they did not optimize. They built something thick and redundant and heavy and full of backup systems and physical solutions to every problem they could anticipate. They built a ship that does not work well. He paused. "But it does not stop working? And there is a very large difference between those two things." He sat back in his chair. The room stayed quiet. Admiral Sen-Ra looked at the image on the screen for a long moment. Then she looked at the people around the table, the architects and theorists and analysts and officers, and she said the thing that all of them had been slowly, reluctantly arriving at on their own. "We need to know more about these humans." She stood up from her chair, which meant the meeting was moving toward conclusion. "I want a diplomatic team assembled and sent to that vessel within 48 hours. I want a full crew behavioral analysis. I want engineering teams to learn everything the humans will let them learn about those drive systems and that hull construction. I want weapons analysts to model every possible engagement scenario involving that ship against our standard vessel types." She began to move toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "And I want someone to find out if there are more ships like that one. Because if the humans have built a fleet on these principles, we need to understand exactly what that means." The meeting ended. People began to move, to talk quietly, to send messages. The data from the Eternal Thoughts sensor scans spread through conclave high command systems and from there outward. And within hours, engineers and analysts on 17 worlds were looking at the same cross-section diagram of the Unyielding Principle's hull and making the same expressions Mareth had made on the Eternal Thoughts bridge. An expression that was difficult to describe. It was the expression of a person who has spent their whole life understanding something very well, and has just discovered that there is an entire other way of understanding it that they had never considered, and that the other way actually works. In his quarters, Drenuk sat alone for a long time after the meeting. He was looking at the battle record footage again. They were at the moment when the unyielding principal turned toward the Sovereignty cruiser and accelerated, not away, toward. He watched it again, and again, and he thought about the word for what that was, and he eventually decided that the word was not a weapons term or an engineering term or a tactical term. The word was something much older and much more fundamental. The word was will, and he had not seen a warship express that particular quality so clearly in a very long time. Oh, he wrote a note to himself at the bottom of his analysis document. It was not an official observation. It was just 4 words that he did not yet know how to expand into a full argument, but felt very strongly were true. They built it alive. He saved the document, turned off his screen, and sat in the dark, thinking about a 4-kilometer ship that leaked water from its pipes and smelled of heat and metal and refused, against every expectation and every law of efficiency, to stop. The diplomatic shuttle from the conclave docked with the unyielding principal at the 13th hour, attaching to an external airlock on the ship's port side that was, according to the diplomatic team's pre-mission briefing, one of 7 working airlocks currently available. The other 4 were either sealed due to damage or, in one case, under active repair and not safe to use. The shuttle's docking clamp made contact and locked. There was a clunk, then a deeper clunk, and then a sound like something being hammered into place by hand from the other side, which was followed by a brief silence, and then the airlock light turned green. Delegate Marath of the Theraki, who had been specifically requested for the mission because she had the most direct experience with the vessel, looked at the green light and then at the 2 diplomatic security officers beside her. Neither of them said anything. The light was green. They proceeded. The airlock opened, and the first thing that hit them was the smell. It was not a bad smell exactly. It was a thick smell, heavy with machine oil and heated metal, and something sharp and slightly bitter that none of them could immediately identify. The corridor beyond the airlock was narrow by Theraki standards, with walls that were bare metal and covered in pipes of various sizes. Some of the pipes were painted in different colors. Some had labels on them in human writing, and a few had small handwritten notes attached with adhesive, which Marath's translation system processed as things like check pressure weekly, and this one runs hot, don't touch, and one that simply said do not. The lighting was functional rather than comfortable, bright enough to work by, placed at regular intervals along the ceiling. Marath noticed that some of the ceiling panels were open, showing more pipes and bundles of cable above them, and that in one section 2 humans were up inside the open ceiling, doing something with tools, their legs hanging down into the corridor while they worked. Neither of them stopped working when the delegation walked past. One of them called down, "Watch your heads," without looking to see who was there. The second thing Marath noticed was the sound. The Eternal Thought was very quiet when underway. Its systems operated with minimal vibration, and the ship had sound dampening built into its hull that made the interior feel calm. The unyielding principle was not quiet. It was a constant presence of sound, a deep, steady thrumming from the engines far below, the hiss and gurgle of pipes, the distant clang of metal on metal from somewhere, the hum of electrical systems, and occasionally from unseen directions, the sound of human voices in conversation. The ship sounded like it was alive and working hard, and it sounded like a thing that was operating at considerable effort and was not troubled by this fact. Captain Mara Osei met them at the junction, where the docking corridor opened into one of the main internal passages. She was shorter than Marath had expected. Humans averaged considerably smaller than Theraki, and she was wearing a dark military uniform that had seen a great deal of use. There was a smear of something dark near the cuff of her left sleeve that she had either not noticed or not bothered to address. Her face was calm and open. She extended one hand toward Marath with the palm angled slightly upward and the fingers together, which Marath recognized as a human greeting gesture. Marath extended her own hand. The captain gripped it briefly and firmly and then released it. The handshake. Marath had read about it. Experiencing it was different from reading about it. There was something oddly direct about it, a deliberate physical acknowledgement of another person's presence. "Delegate Mirath," said Captain Osei, "welcome aboard the Unyielding Principle. I appreciate